Hi everyone, so this is the lecture 3, which is about racial and ethnic inequality. So racial and ethnic inequality is the social problem we can encounter in our daily life. So in the first part of my lecture, I want to cover the definition of the race and ethnicity, and then see what are the social problems related with the racial and ethnic inequality. So race and ethnicity. Race is usually defined by the skin color or the appearances. So skin color as the black or whites or Hispanic or Asians. But in the celebrities, for the celebrities like a biracial or multiracial people, it's very hard to determine whether they are blacks or African Americans or whites or other races. So Adrian Rima has a darker skin color than the whites, but we cannot say she is just simply African American or white or Hispanic like that. Like Derek Jeter, he is not simple black or white, and also the biracial twins. They have the same biological mother and father, but because of their ancestry, they can have some different skin color. So it's very hard to say that the sisters are black or white solely by the skin color or appearances. So race and ethnicity are very similar concept, but they have some differences in the definition. So race is the dividing the people by their traits of the biological or genetic traits. So the race usually emphasize on the physical characteristics such as skin color, the height or the hairstyle, like curly hair or the straight hair. But ethnicity is the concept way more on the culture or traditions or nationality. So race is a more biological division of the people compared with ethnicity, but it has some many limitations compared with the ethnicity. So I want to cover it in the later part. So race has the biological characteristic, so a category of the people who share the inherited characteristic, like a skin color, facial features, or the hair, or the height. So there are majorly 9 races in the US defined by the biology scientists, like African American, Indian, or Native American, and other races. So you can see that these are classified just like a physical characteristics, like a skin color like that. However, there are some complexities in the race concept. So how about the physical differences within the race? So African Americans may have some differences in the skin color, in the level of the skin color, like a darker tone or lighter tones, as well as the whites and Hispanics. So just comparing with the between races, maybe within races have some like a differentials in the difference of the characteristics of the physical characteristics. And how about the biracial or the multiracial people? So if one's father is white and mother is black, is he or she half black or half white? And just like a 51% white or 49% black, it's very hard to determine just solely using the biological characteristics. So it has limitations. So because the race of the person, like a biracial person, is very hard to determine just for the skin color or the inherent characteristics. So former President Barack Obama is considered as black in the US because he was considered as the first African American president in the US history. However, because his mother is white, he will be considered as white in many Latin American countries. So One drop rule applied a lot, because one drop of the blood, like a black blood, will classify him or her as the black. So it was misused in the southern area in the period of slavery, to enlarge the number of the slaves in the southern area. So there are another explanation from the biology. So human race share 99.9% of the DNA, compared with the less than 0.1% of the DNA accounts for the all physical differences of the different races. So having some discriminations or prejudice by the DNA of the less than 0.1% determines some kind of notion for that people. So it's very hard to say that race determines the intelligence or the motivational work, other traits. So we do need to consider the social aspect of the race, just using instead of just using biological traits of the race. So I want to also cover the social construction of the race. So in social construction view of a race is not it's not very real existence other than what we have or think of. So some example of the social construction of the race is the Tiger Woods. So by the social media or news media, he was classified as African American. However, in the blood or inherited characteristic or the blood, he's half Asian and 25% white, and 1 out of 8 are Native American or African American. So just having 12.5% African American made him as African American. So it is usually sometimes defined by the social media or by the social constructing power. So during the time of slavery, biracial people between the white and black were in the lawsuit because they want to avoid the enslavement of the other issues by proving they are white. So there are both biological and social constructional parts of the race. So ethnicity refers to the shared social, cultural, historical experiences. So if they share similar or same distinct beliefs, values, and behaviors, or nationality, and they have same ethnicity. So because of the limitation of the biological terms of the race, many social scientists, including sociologists, prefer the term ethnicity in speaking of the people of color or others. So rather than solely using the biological term as the race, we need to consider sociological or social terms or social construction part of the race to consider social construction or cultural part of the race. Ethnicity and ethnic is the concept to avoid the biological limitations of the race and ratio. So because of the race and ethnicity, there are many social problems related with those issues. So I want to cover that, and I want to show you the background explanations of those issues. So the first one is the prejudice. Prejudice is the set of negative attitudes, beliefs, and judgment about the whole category of people, like subgroups of the population in that category. So that could be African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, or even the whites. So close to the concept of the racism, it's like a certain belief that racial or ethnic groups are inferior to one's own racial group. And also it's related with the stereotype. It's just simplified and mistaken generalizations with the deep investigation about individuals because their race and ethnicity. So there are four major, like two part of the major explanations. So the first view is the social psychological explanations. The authoritarian personality theory explains how the family, especially the parenting, impacts on the prejudice level. So people grow up in the family with the harsh parenting style. They grow up with some like higher obedience to the authority, and they have like a low chance or low tendency to accept the other group. So if they grew up in the harsh parenting family, they are more likely to have higher level of the prejudice compared with the people who grow up in the like a more accumulated parenting like that. But there is another theory, that frustration theory, which is that individuals with the many problems with the stress, they use the coping up strategy that blames others instead of blaming themselves. So they try to find a target who are the groups of the disliked from the nation or the population. So if they find a weak race or ethnicity, they try to blame their troubles on the groups like that. So frustration theory can be applied to the like low educated people, or so who are in the trouble blame other races. So it can be applied to the many issues, the blaming without themselves. So there are two major sociological theories explaining about the prejudice. So social learning theory emphasize on the family environment or socialization process. So people are merely conforming to the culture they grow up. So if they grow up in the family which has like a very high level of the prejudice, they are more likely to have the higher level of the prejudice than other people who grow up in the liberal or egalitarian viewpoint of the family. So the parents and peers and media and other educational institutions are the parts of the culture which impact the level of the prejudice in their socialization process. So the second theory is the group threat theory. So it emphasizes on the competition among the races and ethnicities. So because of the competition over their job positions and their resources, such as education opportunities, they have some like a hostile attitude toward the other races, because their places or their opportunities are replaced by other races. So the first example would be lynching, like a number of lynching the African Americans in the southern area of the U.S. So when southern area has the good economic condition, the number of lynching African American decreased. However, in contrast, when the southern economy worsened, the number of lynching African American increased in that time. So because of the social and the economic condition, they have like a different level of the threats from other races. So they have a different level of the prejudice based on the threat level. And the recent finding says that white women and men are more likely to have the similar level of the racial prejudice. So it was surprising because scholars expected that women have lower level of the prejudice because their empathy level, but still they have very similar level of the prejudice because of the possibly because of the group threat theory, that the threats from the other races were greater than the threats between the gender. So, and then less educated people are more likely to have the higher level of prejudice, and region matters also exist because if they live in the more prejudiced area, they are more likely to have the higher prejudice, such as the southern area. So racial types of racism, like a vivid and very clear pattern of the racism was declined a lot, but some modern types of the racism replaced that place. So kinder, gentler anti-black ideology or to the minor races. So instead of the biological inferiority, people tend to blame the minorities of their poverty because of their cultural poverty, that they are less motivated to work and or they are too lazy to find the jobs. So racial prejudice still exists in the various formats impacting criminal justice, policies, and other social issues, because there are other many prejudice issues also impact on in the format of the discrimination. So discrimination is very arbitrary denial of the rights, privileges, and opportunities of the racial ethnic groups based on their prejudice and based on their racial and ethnic identities. So some racial and ethnic groups are not treated as equally because of their race and ethnicity, not because of their quality or benefits, other reasonable causes. So there are many dimensions of the discrimination and the prejudice. So ethnic bigots are the people who have prejudice and discriminate other people, but all rather liberals are not discriminating other people and don't have prejudice. So there are many types of the discrimination. So first one is the individual discrimination, and second one is the institutional discrimination. So we may be familiar with the individual discrimination because this is very common and type of the discrimination we can encounter in our daily life in the school or workplace, and when we visit the government places or other places based on their race and ethnicity. But institutional discrimination is kind of bigger scope of the concept, which is the macro concept. So discrimination in housing and medical care and criminal justice and education or other schooling process are the institutional discrimination in that range of the society. So height requirement for the police could be one example of the institutional discrimination. So some standard of the height requirement minimum could be not very challenging for the some races have very like a higher or longer average level of the height. But if some race has like a shorter average height, it would be very challenging for them to enter the police force. So there are many types of institutional discrimination, such as healthcare discrimination. So there are very wide health gap between whites and minorities, minority races, due to some part of the discrimination practiced by the medical professionals. So once they found that African Americans are less likely to get the same level of treatments compared with the whites, even though they have like the same symptoms. This is possibly by some prejudice by the medical professionals, and that thinks African Americans are less likely to be insured and less likely to pay the money for the procedure, but still it exists in the healthcare discrimination. And also there is the housing discrimination. This is not very vivid format of the discrimination, but discrimination happens in the mortgage applications. So African Americans have higher decline rates of the housing or mortgage applications compared with the whites. And there are also subtle discrimination by the realtors that they tend not to share the information about the housing in the white neighborhoods, because the white neighborhoods don't want to have the blacks or Hispanic or Asian neighborhoods. So there are not very big format or very vivid format, but there are subtle discriminations in the real US. So there are also employment discrimination. So there is a wide wage gap between whites and other minority members. So people of color continue to face the discrimination in the job market, from the hiring process to the promotion process. So one study found that even though they have the same qualifications, African Americans without a criminal record had a very similar level of the job acceptance rate with the similar level of the whites who have a criminal record. So criminal record was not very meaningful indicator in the job market compared with the race and ethnicity. So there are like prohibitions of the discriminations by the race and ethnicity, but still this type of discrimination and prejudice exists in our daily life. So social psychological theories of the prejudice emphasize on the mental development process, such as authoritarian personalities and frustration. But sociological theories emphasize on social learning as the socialization process as the family and peer group or social media, and group threat are based on the competition level and kind of the competitors in the other races. So individual discrimination is common one we can face in the daily life, and the institutional discrimination is a more bigger one, stems from the prejudice, and other places in the world. So I want to explain more about the racial and ethnic inequality as their background and how to reduce these inequalities. So recent statistic of the inequality by race in the US. So in 2010, whites are more likely to earn more money and have better education compared with the African Americans and Latinos and Native Americans. So they have like a lower poverty level and a lower mortality level than other minority races. So the wealth gap what is widened in the time by time, but yeah, it just says that there are different lifestyles and life chances between the white and other minority members. So Asian is kind of the extraordinary case as the outlier because they have the better life conditions, but still if they have the same, I mean if the whites and the Asian have the same qualifications, the employers prefer the whites to Asian in the with the better income and better promotion rate. So there are like two contrasting concepts or situations for the minorities and the whites. So ethnic or racial minorities are considered to have the hidden toll. So African Americans and racial minorities have the hidden toll filled with the prejudice and discrimination. From their birth, they are more likely to have the poor family or some low level of education and low income, and then the worsened health level compared to the white. However, whites are considered to have the white privilege, that various types of the benefits of the being white, and at least they don't need to fear about the disadvantages because of their race and ethnicity. So there are also theories of the racial and ethnic inequality. So biological inferiority was used in the long time ago, saying that people of color are biologically inferior in the intelligence and other traits of the performance. So few scholars now agree with their point of view because it's like blaming the victim instead of the consideration of the social products. And also there is a perspective of the cultural deficiencies. So it's very similar with the poverty, with the cultural poverty. So they say that the people of the color have low achievement level because of their lack of motivation and their willpower. But little evidence was found by the studies, and then some cultural problems like the gang culture or other culture may be impacted by the social problems in that area. So structural problems are some based on the theory of the conflict theory, blaming the system instead of the individuals who are in the poor, who are in the minority racial condition. So it argues that institutional and individual discrimination matters for the low achievement and the low schooling or low income for the minority levels. So economic changes can swing lives of the racial and ethnic minorities than whites. So there are many attempts to reduce the racial and ethnic gaps in the inequality. So affirmative action was applied to provide the special considerations for the minorities, such as a woman or the racial minorities in the employment and the education. So Conceptually, it was provided to compensate the disadvantages they had in their life because of the prejudice and the discrimination. However, this is still very controversial issue because the people who oppose the affirmative action try to say that this is kind of reverse discrimination to the whites. So because the more qualified whites cannot get the job or get the education compared with the less qualified people on the counterpart. So this is also partially true or partially not true because even though they have some like a reverse discrimination, whites can have the better health condition, better education resources, and better social network to help them find a job or education. So there are serious debates, but at least it's true that affirmative action is not a perfect one, but it could provide many chances to the women or the racial minorities in the employment and the education process. So biological inferiority theory was used in a long time ago, but in these days is considered as a racism. And cultural explanation emphasizing the cultural deficiencies such as poor or ethnic minorities have like low motivation and not good characteristics. But we need to also consider that cultures of the minorities can be affected by the structural problems or structural changes. So affirmative action is not a very perfect one, but it provides opportunities to the minorities and compensates disadvantages, even though there are many controversial issues and debates. So as you always do, make sure to submit your quiz and daily writings by tonight. And also, please let me know if you have any problems or issues or questions about the course as well. Okay, so thank you very much for watching my video and see you tomorrow.